Welcome to the Indigenous Voice. My name is Mazen Al-Nahawi. I'm visitor on this unceded land of Coast Salish people, and part of our show it's just to remind people of some basic fundamental issue in regard to learn about the culture, the tradition, the history of the indigenous people on this land. And today we are really privileged to have with us again Elder Tom Sampson from the Tsartlip First Nation. And not just that, Elder Tom brought with him Nivier, his great-granddaughter. Welcome back, Elder Tom, to the show. And today we are going to talk actually about a very important subject. It is the Indigenous Rights. But before starting with that, we want to just ask a basic question about treaties. What is a treaty? Elder Tom, if you can explain to us before we start, for people who don't know the issue, what is really a treaty mean?
Well, according to our understanding, the treaty is about an agreement between two nations, the people who signed the treaty with the Governor Douglas, in this case, and the Salish people, where I come from. So the treaty then was between the First Nations of Salish and the Crown, who was representing the Queen of England at the time. Mm-hmm. And so the treaty then is with the Crown. And when the Crown transferred that authority to the federal government, the federal government then represents the Crown. So our treaty, the Douglas Treaty, is with the Crown, the federal government of Canada. We have no treaty with the province of British Columbia. Everything that we know by way of the treaty is that when our ancestors signed the treaty or agreed to the treaty, it was to grant permission to the immigrants or people who migrated here. It was given them the right to settle in parts of our territory. Mm-hmm. And our ancestors agreed to that yes, it's because there was so much land at the time. And I guess our ancestors said, it's okay because we have space for them. And they welcomed them that way. So the signing of the treaty then begins with the two nations, the Crown and the First Nations of the Salish tribes. Mm-hmm. That's what the treaty says. And the treaty also says that we are allowed to hunt and fish as formally as if we were the sole occupants of the land. Mm-hmm. And no law could be made over and above the treaty that we signed, our ancestors signed with Governor Douglas. So that was the purpose and the intent of the treaty, was to create this relationship with the Crown, the federal government, and so that they could begin building some kind of relationship and building the nation as we know it. We have to always remember, this treaty is a pre-Confederation treaty. Canada was not a country yet. It was still, they were just colonial communities, a colony of people. There was no government here yet in British Columbia or in Canada yet. Canada didn't become a country till 1867, I think, when they became a country recognized as one of the Commonwealth countries under the Crown of England. So the treaty then is paramount over any other law, whether it's the Indian Act or the laws of British Columbia. The legislature of British Columbia had no power and authority to regulate or to agree to anything without consulting the federal government, who was the other signing partner of the treaty that our people signed in 1852. So that's always been our position. We've never wavered from it. We've been challenged. We've been incarcerated. Everything's happened to us in spite of the treaty. You know, a lot of our people spent time in jail, and when Canada authorized, when British Columbia became part of the Commonwealth or became part of Canada, they began to make laws which were not consistent with our treaty. So our treaty has been breached right since 1867, right to the present day. There is no, we still have a lot of unfinished business with the Crown with the Government of Canada representing the Crown. So that unfinished business is going to create more and more, I think, issues that the public don't really understand, because they didn't realize that the Government of Canada had agreed that all of our lands were still traditional territory. But because of the Indian Act, they created Indian reserves, which was the first breach of the treaty, where they said, you have to live here now. And so they surveyed an Indian reserve land, and then they put us there, or made us stay there. So right from the beginning, the Crown, the federal government, has continuously breached the treaty that the Queen of England originally signed with our people as the representing the Crown at that particular time in history. So treaty then is like any other legal document. It's an agreement between people, and neither one has the right to breach that treaty unless there is sufficient discussions and negotiations, if negotiations, to exactly how that treaty is to be implemented, or how it is to be looked after by the people who've come to this country in the last 200 years.
So there is a conflict here between what the federal and the provincial also. As you said, the treaty was done with the Crown, with the government, but now, let's say when the provincial government want to talk about a new LNG proposal, for example, do they follow these three? Do they relate to these treaty? Do they consider them?
Well, we've been to court so many times, right from this level, from the provincial level, right to the Supreme Court of Canada. And even in spite of the treaty that's been clearly defined and spelled out by our people, each time we've gone to court, the province continues to insist on that it has some kind of right. Well, it doesn't, because they have no signature on our treaty. It's only with the Crown. So as the province continues to behave in the manner that they've behaved, and they're causing serious conflict between ourselves and the federal government. And it's the federal government who authorized the province to create the province of British Columbia through their own constitution. In 1867, I think, when British Columbia entered Confederation. So from that point on, we've been in total conflict with the province. You know, the history of our relationship is not something that we can stand up and say, hallelujah. We can't say that. It's been a living hell, for one thing. You know, the history of our relationship has been anything but good, and it continues to this day. It hasn't changed much. the, the Crown continues to breach the treaty. They know it's there. The Supreme Court of Canada has told them time and again. There is a law in this country that creates laws for Canada as well as each one of the provinces across Canada. And each one of these provinces, these colonies were colonies at one time, became a country through their own constitution. But our treaty is outside of that constitution. You know, otherwise, why do you have Indigenous rights, or why do you have Indigenous people? And this has been an ongoing conflict between the government of Canada and the First Nations across this country. You know, we've had to go to the international arena, international courts, to continue to fight that battle of the recognition of Indigenous rights. And finally, yes, it does exist. And it doesn't exist because it's something new. It's been there since at least 1867, when the courts, the superior courts of Canada and of Quebec clearly acknowledged that Indian rights, Indian First Nations cultures was alive and doing well, and it was never, ever abrogated. It was never surrendered to anyone, and it is alive to this moment. So when we talk about how do we reconcile these differences or these positions that the government has taken, the government of Canada has been challenged many times at the lower courts and all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. And they have been told time and time again, you can't do this anymore. You either change your laws and acknowledge what is the law of the country. And even in 1987, when the Canadian Constitution became law in this country, Aboriginal rights and treaty rights were clearly spelled out in the Constitution. The courts have continued to, the province and the federal government have continued to argue that the Band Council or the authorities that they've created, that they are the legal authority in the country. The Supreme Court of Canada said no. The real leaders in Canada are the heads of the House, the clan, and the hereditary chief, where there is one.
This is important thing. So would you please repeat that to our viewers, that about what the Supreme Court of Canada said about the leadership and who represent the Indigenous people?
Well, it came out of when the Constitution of Canada was in 1987, became law in this country. One of the things that I think a lot of the lawyers and judges didn't understand, that common law was part of that agreement. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the laws of our people, common law, became immediately recognized as a constitutional right. Mm-hmm. So we have these ongoing battles with the federal government through the Department of Indian Affairs and the Department of Aboriginal Rights in British Columbia, because they formed their own little enclave, which they say represents a province. Well, we don't have an agreement with a province. We don't have a treaty with them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how can they say we have an agreement with them? They tried that through the Claims Commission, the BC Claims Commission, and everyone said they were never in favor of it, because in order to have a treaty with the province of British Columbia, we would have to surrender all of our rights. And our people said, that's never going to happen. So we're in constant conflict in terms of what the law means and what the Constitution says, what that legal right is under the Canadian Constitution. So I guess the new government, the federal government, has to come to terms with how it wants to deal with us, the treaty tribes across Canada. And the reason we've never agreed with the treaty tribes, with the federal government in terms of the Indian Act, the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, the Senate of the Government of Canada said to one of the tribes in Eastern Canada that when they were trying to have the right to self-determination, and they were asking the people from Eastern Canada, do you realize that if you accept a delegated authority that you are a crown corporation? So the tribes didn't know that under the Indian Act and under the elections of a band council, the band council becomes a crown corporation. And that's been stated by the courts of Canada. So as we begin to learn and understand what Indigenous rights means, there are two absolute separate paths: the Indigenous right and the legislative right. Mm-hmm. We have completely, time and again, said no, we will not accept that kind of authority in terms of our Indigenous right, because then we would be breaching our Indigenous right by proclaiming that yes, the government has the power to grant us delegated authority or delegated rights. We've always said no.
And for Nivier, by the way, Nivier, you told me it's heaven, but in the other way around, which is in Arabic. In that case, we write from right to left. So if we read heaven from right to left, it's Nivier. For the new generation, like your great-granddaughter, to know about these rights, I'm sure you think this is a very important priority.
Well, it starts with the word Chilangan, which means the birthright. That's who I am, who we are. It's called Chilangan in our language, and Chilangan means where I am from this place. This is where I've come from. Chilangan.
Chilangan.
So she has an Indian name, a name of her own, that gives her title and rights to the community and the family that she lives in which community. That is part of our Chilangan, which really is, in a lot of ways means this is our constitution.
Our traditions and culture.
Yeah, culture, the language, the history, the ceremonies, the songs that go with the ceremonies that she is allowed to exercise now because she has the name that goes with it. And all of our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren are all in the same line. She's part Nez Perce. Her great-grandmother was from Idaho. My grandmother was Nez Perce. My mother was Nez Perce, from the Chief Joseph Yellow Wolf family. So she has two sets of birthrights. She can either go through the Nez Perce or come through Coast Salish as her right. And all of the children then are given that same inherent right from the day they're conceived in their mother.
And by the way, it's not just an honor to have you here, and when it was really nice. Nice also to have Nivier here, and you don't see that usually on TV show to have an educator like yourself next to a little wonderful little girl like Nivier, just sitting around and watching.
Well, I think, you know, that in order for Canada, because our responsibility, our authorities, we've always said that our right, because it was acknowledged by the treaty, that the whole education system has got to change. You know, we've struggled with that, you know, right from the time of the residential schools right up to the present day. The very little information, real proper information that the institutions, education institutions can actually use and help develop a real relationship between the cultures that are now in Canada as well as the First Nations culture or Indigenous cultures of this country. We've had an ongoing battle with the education people. The history only recently, very recent, is finally starting to acknowledge, yes, these people were here for a long time. And yes, we've made a mistake. And yes, we've got to change our curriculum. Yes, we've got to now look at how can we accept the ceremonies, the songs that she has to sing when she grows up. Because her grandmother, her great-grandmother, that's their job to do that. According to one of the writers of education in North America, and studies done in the United States as well as in Canada, that the education system has not changed one iota in the last 800 years. The foundation of education hasn't changed. It doesn't produce people, it produces professionals. So that conflict then, in terms of the way we teach our children, the kind of education that needs to be understood, is a form of education that is relevant to the language, relevant to the environment, and relevant to everything that we are. I read about, you know, Moses and all these people, and went across the ocean and ran into a storm, and because that's what the religion, Christian world teaches, wants us to accept. Well, our history doesn't say that. It says something different. You know, we talk about this in our months of reconciling every one of our community and our family. We come together in November, December, and January, and we visit each community. We do the ceremonies to acknowledge that we are still here yet. Memorials, birthdays, weddings, all kind of ceremonies. And we use our own ratification system to ratify those kind of relationships. Transfer of land, transfer authority, responsibility, is all done through ceremony. So when the government of Canada signed that treaty, that's what they agreed to. And they haven't done that. Instead, they want us to continue compromising. And we know that hasn't worked. They know it, and we know it. Everybody knows it. It doesn't work. Everywhere I've gone in the last 20 years, I chaired the Constitutional Working Group for the Status Indians of Canada. And I had an opportunity to travel from east to west, north and south, even to visit our American relatives, to see how they managed their relationship with the government of Canada as well as the government of the United States. It hasn't been a very pretty picture. A continuous denial that we do have rights in this country. We've always had them.
There's actually one important issue here. Respect. If respect existed, then the issue of acknowledging the indigenous right should be no problem at all. But when a guest or a visitor does not respect the host, does not even consider the host that they existed. As you said, you hear a lot of Hollywood movie about Moses or Santa Claus sometimes, but has become like a real issue. Elder Tom, it's this subject you initiated to talk about the indigenous right. We started today, and as you suggested, we'll continue to talk about it because it's our duty here to let people know about these issues. So we are aware of what's happening to the indigenous people, and unfortunately we are out of time. But thanks a lot for coming on the show to teach us more about this stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elder Tom, and thanks for watching this segment. Welcome back to the second segment of Indigenous Voice. In this segment, we have with us Shauna Johnson. Welcome, Shauna. Shauna is a community planner, but before we talk about the Indigenous community planning, we would like to hear a little bit about background of Shauna. Shauna. Hi, Shauna. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So I am Coast Salish on my mother's side from the Tsawout First Nation. My father's side, he's from Metlakatla, Alaska, so the Tsimshian people, and I'm associated with the Lakalams band there in Port Simpson, BC. I'm just now completing my master's degree in Indigenous Community Planning at UBC. I've been working on that for the past 2 years, and I'm living in Vancouver.
Nice.
Yeah.
Shauna, what does a community planner do?
Well, when people think of planners, generally they think about urban planners or city planners because those are the mainstream planning fields that planners go into at UBC or other planning schools across Canada. But UBC, I was the 4th year in this program. It's the specialization of Indigenous Community Planning, and for me, and being in this specialization, we're focusing on planning for First Nation communities. So what my job would be, we know the unique circumstances that face communities across Canada today for in Indigenous communities, which they're very unique circumstances. They're not the same as any other communities that are
Indigenous community.
Yeah, yeah. So with the Indian Act and land code and different legal circumstances being under the federal government, we have to have a good understanding of how to navigate that. So our job is to have a good understanding of that. But the main focus for Indigenous community planning is to look at Indigenous ways of planning. And that's very different because Indigenous communities have been planning for centuries. In the Western fields or universities, it just hasn't been recognized as what you call planning.
Exactly.
But that's changing now. With this new program that I've been in, I mean, it's only the first one in Canada, I think, that exists for focusing on Indigenous communities and planning. So,
so this is the one of the. You said this is the only program
that I am aware of. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking here about community planning that it's related to the traditions and the laws of the indigenous people, and to be aware of these laws. So, it's kind of it's sad that you don't recognize these laws or these traditions. I mean, even in this time of time.
Yeah. But like I said, that is changing. with this program, they focus a lot on revitalizing Indigenous ways of planning, or rediscovering, or using the existing protocols and practices that Indigenous communities use to plan. So that's changing, and we focus on doing that. We focus on finding those ways and then helping the community work with those ways of planning to do whatever planning they need. It could be health planning, social development planning, comprehensive community planning. There's a lot of land use planning happening right now in the nations, and there's a big need for it, and people that really understand what it's like to be in a community that has those different circumstances, not just with the Indian Act, but there's multiple barriers that prevent communities from moving forward in a good way. Having access to proper land and having access to revenues to help build their communities in a way to fund services that are really needed, badly. First Nation communities are severely underfunded with INAC, revenues coming from them. So, yeah.
So what are some of the process you do in your planning?
Well, with working in like my community, for example, we have family heads. So there's different families in the communities. People know who they are. And there's one person that's designated with speaking out and giving that family a voice. But they do all the background work. They talk with their families about issues, and then they bring those issues to the table at the band council or on a committee. So those are existing processes that we can use and get into that.
In which area the main most important that the Native community or Indigenous community need planning? Which are the most weakest area, like housing? What are that area?
The weakest area, or like
the main area?
The main areas.
Yeah, it's which kind of a priority? Very important to deal with first. I mean.
Yeah, a lot of nations now are focusing on land use planning.
Sorry?
Land use planning.
Land use planning.
Yep.
Okay.
Comprehensive community planning is really large right now.
When you say land use planning, like, are you talking about agriculture or hunting or what?
Any kind of land use that's happening on their reserve. Yeah,
Okay.
and the main drive for that is to determine where, most of all, how they can benefit from the lands with financially. So economic development, I think, is a large driver because, like I said, most nations are severely underfunded with INAC funds. So they're trying to find a way to create revenue and to possibly, purchase land in the future because they have limited land already. Not enough to provide housing for the communities. There's not enough spaces for people to hunt and gather and practice their traditional rights on the land and everything. So
when you talk about spaces, you mean like because of projects, industrial projects, or what are the obstacles here? I mean, we live in a
limited
big
space.
land here.
Yeah.
And when we hear about limited space, it's kind of it's absurd to hear that term, actually.
Right. Well, there's a long history of the government of Canada giving reserve land to the nation, but then over the years, the land just got decreasingly smaller and smaller and smaller, and we were so small that we have no access to the places that we used to hunt and gather, the places that we used to practice our ceremonies and pray and go and fast and try to be as close as we can to the Creator. So with limited space, you have to have the money to buy more land. But it's a long process to make that land into reserve land. They call it, it takes like over 10 years to become an addition to reserve land for them to be able to actually use it under the reserve system, under the Indian Act. So it's a long process.
Okay. Shauna, would you please tell us a little bit, not as much as you can, about the new project you are working with? It's relate to Indigenous laws.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this project. Like I said, I just finished grad school. I was looking for opportunities to use my skills back in my community, and the University of Victoria and West Coast Environmental Law put out this call, an expression of interest for nations to apply, and it's called the RELAW project, so Revitalizing Indigenous Law. And the whole idea about this is using stories to revitalize our laws. So looking to the stories for legal principles that we can draw out of it as a foundation to apply to an environmental problem or like an environmental issue that we're concerned about. So we are one of 6 nations all across BC that are participating in this project. And right now, we're basically collecting as many stories as we can. From old anthropological sources, from people in our community, documenting them, and doing sort of a brief case. So it's similar to what a lawyer would do when they're taking a case to the courts. They would look at all the facts and just sort of brief out, what are the decisions that were made and documenting that. So once we have all that together, we're going to look at all of those brief cases together. It's sort of like, with stories, like I haven't been privileged enough in my family to have that kind of, like stories haven't been passed down in my family. A lot of that has been broken. So collecting these stories is such a great thing for me because I'm rediscovering so many things about myself and, who I am and where my community, like who my community is and where I come from and, where all these teachings are coming from because I've heard, ever since I've been on this journey of trying to discover my identity again, I didn't grow up Christian. Like I didn't grow up knowing my history. I grew up Christian. So, for me, I'm trying to rediscover all of that. But for stories, because they haven't been passed down, usually a storyteller in the family will repeatedly tell different stories throughout a person's life. And depending on your age or your gender or maybe a circumstance you're going through, those stories will change. And the storyteller will try to give you the teachings that you need to live a good life and to be a good person and to follow ceremony and to learn all of that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So this seemed like an important theme for every Native person, Indigenous person I met. They all talk about coming back to learn about my identity.
So at this point, I guess to sort of continue about the storyteller, when you're hearing the stories, you don't always hear, the same teachings from one story. They're all in different stories all over the place. And then sometimes you go through an experience and be like, oh, I remember when that story was told to me, this is what I learned from it, and I could use that in my life now. But when you have all of your stories together and you know all of them, then you're learning teachings from different places and different stories and different contexts in your life, and it just makes it so much richer. So that's sort of where we're heading with this project and our work right now. And once we document some of the similar themes and similar learnings and teachings and legal principles from all those stories, then we can use them to apply them to real life situations that we're dealing with right now. And for Tsawout in our community, when I approached them about this project, they said that one of the biggest concerns is their protection of the marine environment.
Okay, why specifically that?
Well, there's increasingly more threats to our waters, and for us, we are the Salish people. We are reef netting people. We lived most of our life, from what I understand, out on the water. That was our territory. Most of our territory is, in fact, saltwater, and we were known as the saltwater people. So having access to those waters and being on the water are very important because you know, they're not just it's not just an element water. Like the islands aren't just islands, like the salmon aren't just salmon. To us, they're our relatives. We have creation stories that tell us that they are, in fact, our relatives, and they were once humans. So we need to treat them with respect, and we need to protect them and maintain that relationship with them, which is key. And it's very difficult to do in this situation now with all the different competing interests and having no legal authority or the right to make the decisions that we would like to. So we have to somehow get out, communicate like a plan of some sort or a vision of how we see our waters being protected, and that's kind of the end product of this project.
Yeah, especially not just it's a sacred for the way of life or for the indigenous people. Also, when we talk here about the treaties been done in the past to protect that, but we never really follow on that treaty. I mean, and this is one of the issue I try to bring to people's attention, that when you have a treaty between an equal partner or an equal group of people, then you won't have a right treaty, or you won't have a proper treaty respect both as equal.
Yeah. Yeah, and most people aren't aware of that treaty. It's not a modern treaty. It's not a treaty that's going through the BC treaty process, which unfortunately means that people think of it as less of a treaty, which it's not. It was a treaty that should be honored. We've won a court case in it, the Sandwich Bay Marina case that asserted our rights, and the court acknowledged that it was in fact a treaty. And you know, so that's sort of an underlying theme too about this whole project, because our this project is our laws. You know, it's how we.
Or reviving these laws, bring them back, because they are. I mean, absolutely, they are the law of the indigenous people of this land. Why we will have more priority for a colonial settler system laws when we have the indigenous laws and about their way of life, how they deal between themselves. The project you're doing, it's a very important work, Shauna, but so would you tell us a little bit more, just we are kind of still have 2 minutes, about your master degree?
Right. Yeah, so my master's degree, this part of the project, I guess, too, like I'm doing the planning part of it. So I'm going to bring the community together and talk about how they see their future for the marine use plan, or how to protect our waters. So, but the program itself it's really different, because in the second year we do a practicum for 8 months, and we get partnered. So I had a partner with me that I worked with. We worked in pairs, and we were both sent to UBC about once a month to Tsawout Nation, which just became a self-governing nation.
Right, okay.
And we helped them. The major piece was developing a youth plan for them, like a youth strategy on how the youth can have a voice in their community, especially leading towards self-governance. They want to know how the youth see themselves, because they are the future and the stewards of the land of the future. So,
great. Shauna, please let us know about any update, any new news. This is, as you know, this is your place here. This is your show as well. Thanks, Shauna, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for watching this segment. Welcome back to Indigenous Voice. In this segment, we are going to talk about art and carving. And by the way, I'm just holding here a piece of art by Ben Belkey. I promised him in the last show to have it on our table, and here it is. Thanks a lot, Ben. And today we have with us, and it's a great privilege to have with us, artist Howard LaFortune Sr.
Yes.
And Howard, you are from Coast Salish Nation.
Yes, Tsawout.
Please tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been in Tsawout for the last 25 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived up and down the island for a while, and I started carving when I was 16, and I've been doing it ever since. And down the causeway, we sit down there and try and sell our artwork. And
Do you remember why you start learning this way of art?
that's because I quit school.
Because you quit school, okay.
Thank you.
So, but again,
Yeah, no, I quit school, and my brother said I need something to do, and he's been carving since he was 18, Doug LaFortune, and he said I need something to do, so he taught me how to do it, and I've been doing it ever since.
okay. And we have here with there is two pieces of your work. Would you please tell us a little bit about them, what they represent? And
The raven and the frog.
mm-hmm.
The raven's known as the trickster, and the frog's known as wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the eagle mask. It's
Mm-hmm.
strength. And I left the natural wood on the eagle because I like the grain. It's different on both sides.
Uh-huh.
And the yellow cedar, it's painted because that's what I saw on it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've been doing this for 36 years, going on 37 soon. And yeah, we've been down the causeway the 7-8 years now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been pretty tough down there, but we get by.
And do you think, or a different way I want to say that, why this art is important for people to know about or to see?
But it's something that our ancestors and that did years ago, but they didn't use just red cedar and yellow cedar. They used other trees as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yew wood for digging and that.
Mm-hmm.
And every tree is useful for something.
Mm-hmm.
Building houses and artwork.
And beside wood, any other material you work on?
I work a little bit in silver and some in leather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and leather, I guess I've been doing it for 5 years now. I just found out today. But yeah, I've got work all over the world, along with my brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2 of them been to Germany for an art show there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and 2 have been to Singapore to carve some poles. So yeah, it's a big family. We got there's 6 of us brothers who all carve, and
all of you are carver. Okay,
yeah,
nice.
and then we got nephews who carve,
Mm-hmm.
and nieces who paint, and sisters that knit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
What about your kids? Do you have kids?
my oldest son, he carves.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's tried it, but it wasn't her.
Yeah, I would like to know about that. Now, when we talk about a man and a woman, I mean,
Mhm.
a carver, is there any, like, only men do that kind of art, or you would see an artist?
No, it's whatever you feel like carving. Like
Mhm.
I call this contemporary Coast Salish because I got some Coast Salish designs in there, and then the raven, I put other designs on there,
Mm-hmm.
and the Coast Salish designs are mostly these arrows and darts.
Uh-huh. And what other
It
style?
fills in because it could just be a circle and then a couple darts to portray the eye.
Mhm.
It's a nice design when you get a hold of it.
So when you see that, you know, this is from Coast Salish
Yeah.
art. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you are familiar with the kind of difference or similarity?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why I call this contemporary Coast Salish, because I don't really go the full Coast Salish design.
Mhm. And what about the classic one? I mean, the previous style of that before the contemporary, were like more simpler?
No, there's more designs, more flow to it,
Uh-huh.
and you have to make every design flow together so
Mhm.
you don't lose track.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what be talking about the leather, what kind of work you do on leather? And
I use my designs on leather. Like I drew a nice eagle, and it has mountains and water on it. I used my carved knife to carve it out, and I stain it. So I should have brought it, but I never thought about it at the time till now. But yeah, it's fun. Like I've been to some of the schools around here and did some demonstrations for them, for kids, mostly kids, and I like to talk to the kids about it because they're young and they can pick it up if they want.
so in the end, you did not leave school. You came back to teach in school. I mean, so why you said you ran away from school?
I didn't run. They kicked me out.
Ah, they kick you out. Okay. Or is it because this art? Oh, no, I'm sorry. At that time, you'd not start yet. Now, what from these three, which one prefer more to work with? Wood, silver, or leather?
It depends on my feeling, how I feel.
Okay.
And there's so much carvers out there right now. I just got back into carving steady this year. The last 5 to 10 years, it wasn't very good. I wasn't happy with it.
Okay.
But this year, like this one took me a while to do. It's, I don't know, probably 10 days or so.
Ah, while 10 days. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Only 10 days to do that. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, I thought
maybe, but that's sitting down the causeway working on it too. Because I sit down and because when I'm sitting down there working, I can work, and some people come up and ask me questions, and I'll answer them. And if kids come up and they're interested, I'll stop carving and I'll show them the designs I'm working on, or show them how to use a knife. So yeah, it's fun.
How is the interaction between the indigenous artists on it? I mean, I'm sure they are they, but I mean...
Well, down the causeway, it's, everybody has their own style and their own way of selling stuff. So, yeah.
And also, I'm sure it's a way of meditation for each one of them to
Yeah.
go there, sit down, and work.
Yeah,
on their thing.
a lot of them get along with some of the customers a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's how the art world is.
But in general, people are interested about to know and learn about the indigenous art. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've had people from all over the world stop by and take pictures and talk to me and sit down. I had one guy sit with me for about 2 hours just talking.
And do they know, beside their interests about this art, do they know anything about the history of in general?
They ask about it, but it's however you feel, or if you want to explain it to them, and depends on your mood.
Okay.
Yeah, because
And
if
how
you're in a
is-
bad mood, you can't really work on anything.
Do you
So
go
I got to be
there?
in a good mood all the
Yes.
time.
So I'm sure you don't go there if you're in a bad mood.
Yeah. I go for a walk.
Nice. Okay. And inside the Tsawout community, how is
There's a lot of artists on Tsawout
artists? I'm
community.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They all
Now-
live in probably a 3-block area of each other.
Okay, so there's a neighborhood for the artist. Okay, okay, nice. When we talk about the 4 band or 4 nations of the Wasanish, talking here, is the same kind of art all across these 4 nations, or there is a little bit of variety here?
It's a variety. It depends on what you're looking for, because you can talk to the customers and see what they want. And if they want a certain thing, there's certain carvers that can do it. And me, I'll carve whatever I want,
Okay.
along with leather and silver.
We still have a minute or two. Would you tell me a little bit about the whole process, from the minute, the second you catch the piece of wood in your hand?
Like
to
I
the
tell
end?
people that when I'm starting a carving, it's got to be in the wood. I can sit there with a pencil and draw and draw and draw until I feel like that's what it is. It's really the wood telling you what's in there. You just bring it out. Yeah.
So the wood and the stone would do the same thing, because Ben told me in the last that also you hold the piece of stone in your hand, and what you feel it's going to be.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. Well, I've carved wooden rings. I carved like 4 or 5, and those took a while. So, yeah.
Okay. Nice.
This one here, that was carved out of yellow cedar, but then I had somebody cast it for silver.
And this is an eagle also.
Yeah.
See, the eagle, it's one of the most famous
Yeah.
symbol in the indigenous art.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I got designs I'm trying. And
Howard, thanks very much for coming on the show. And
you.
Please, in the Inner Harbor, if you stop there, you will see Howard. I'm sure when he's there in a good mood all the time, please stop by.
working or taking a nap.
Welcome. Thanks a lot, Howard, for being on the show, and thanks for watching today's show.